I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is Roshi Musai Sydney Walter, who is teacher and priest at the Prajna Zendo, which is a Zen center in Lamy. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Again, let's explain that to people. No, you haven't missed a TV show with him. Sydney was a guest of mine a few times back when I was doing radio, and lots of good people back then, so I tap into them and bring them on the air. So today's prophetic topic is see one's own true nature. And this topic comes from a statement that is attributed to the Bodhidharma, who was the first Zen patriarch. And we're going to talk about that too. The complete statement reads as follows: a special transmission outside the scriptures, not dependent on words or letters, direct pointing to the mind of humanity, lets one see one's own true nature. So before we get into that, let's spend a few minutes, Sydney. Introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? How did you become a teacher and a priest at a Zen center?
It's a long story, but I'll shorten it. I've been practicing Zen since January 1970. When I walked into the San Francisco Zen Center, my life at that point was a train wreck. And I walked into the San Francisco Zen Center for a talk by Suzuki Roshi, and something clicked. So I've been practicing Zen since then.
Wasn't he the guy who introduced Zen to the United States?
Well, he was one. He was one of the pioneers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been interesting.
Wonderful, wonderful teacher. So I studied with him for a while and with other teachers, and finally gravitated toward a teacher in Los Angeles named Maizumi Roshi, another Japanese teacher. And I studied with him until his death in 1995. And then I continued studying with a Dharma successor of his, someone who he had authorized to teach. And the two of us started a Zen center in Albuquerque called Hidden Mountain Zen Center.
That's still there, isn't it?
No, it isn't.
Oh, okay.
We went through some real difficulties there. I don't need to go into that now, but I stopped being, his name was Jitsuro Sensei, I stopped being his student and I became Genpo Roshi's student. And from Genpo Roshi I received what in the Rinzai tradition we call Inka, which roughly translates as the final seal of approval. So that's when your teacher says, you're completely independent, you got it, you teach it. So I guess those, you could say, are the headlines of my Zen career.
Well, two questions. What was the spiritual practice, if any, that you had before you found Zen?
None.
None.
I was in a life crisis. I was 35 years old. And as I said, my life was a train wreck. And I was looking for some way to heal, to revamp and renew my life. And I lived in San Francisco in 1967. And no, it wasn't 67, 1970. And I perceived my difficulty as a spiritual problem. I looked for a spiritual answer. I had lots of opportunities and alternatives in San Francisco in 1970, and Zen was the one that really caught my attention.
If I asked you to narrow it down to one thing that you heard that first lecture, what was it that caught your attention and says, I want to do this?
You know, it wasn't so much the lecture. I had, when you meet privately with a teacher, it's called Dokusan. So somebody asked me if I wanted to have a Dokusan meeting with Suzuki Roshi. And I said, sure. So I went in to meet with him, sat down in front of him, and I don't remember what he said, but I started to tell him the story of my life at the current time, which I felt was a disaster. And as I told him this story and all its sad details, he began to chuckle. And I thought, well, this is odd because this isn't a funny story. And then I thought, but it's even more odd because I'm not offended.
Okay.
So, but I went on telling my story, and when I finished the story, he was silent, and I said, Roshi, what should I do? And he said, do Zazen. Zazen is Zen meditation. Do Zazen. Life without Zazen is like winding your clock without setting it. It runs perfectly well, but it doesn't tell time. And he rang his little bell and sent me out.
Oh, that is great.
And I thought, that's the best advice I've gotten from anybody in a long time. And you know, I had investigated other practices, and this was this one yogi who wanted me to come to his ashram in India, and he was going to teach me how to fly and read people's minds and be invisible. So I had this very simple, utterly compelling Zen master that was telling me, just sit and maybe you'll learn how to tell time. And this Indian yogi that was saying, no, come with me. He didn't say no. Come with me. I can teach you all of these spiritual. Yeah. And it was just clear to me which I needed.
Yeah, I can understand that. The other question I wanted to ask you is, can you explain in a little bit of detail the process of getting a master? Do you choose the master? Does the master choose the student? Is it mutual?
No, you choose a teacher. I mean, you sit with, well, at least this was my process. I sat with a teacher in a community and kind of tried to feel, is this the right teacher for me? And that was clear to me almost immediately with Maizumi Roshi, that he was the right teacher for me. Suzuki Roshi, in the meantime, had become quite ill and not too long after that died. So he was not a possibility for me.
So Mizumi was a student of his?
No. Mizumi was a different teacher from a different lineage.
Okay.
Also Zen, but not connected to Suzuki Roshi. He was also one of the pioneers that came over at about the same time that Suzuki Roshi did to teach Zen in the West.
How many different schools or lineages are there of Zen?
There are two main lineages that are current. One is the Soto and one is the Rinzai. And Maizumi Roshi had Dharma transmission. In other words, he was authorized to teach by masters in both those traditions. So he offered the possibility of a kind of synthesis of Soto and Rinzai.
And that's what you practice now?
And that's what I practice.
Is that common?
And what I teach. No, it isn't. It's much more common to be aligned with one or the other.
Can you kind of give us a brief explanation of how they differ?
The Soto Zen practice relies on a meditation practice called shikantaza, which translates roughly as just sitting. And it's a very simple, it's actually what I'm going to teach today when I do the meditation demonstration. The Rinzai tradition relies on that, but also, and maybe more so, on something called koan study, which is sitting with, meditating with these conundrums, these odd little stories that seem to be contradictory or meaningless or ambiguous, but you sit with them until you appreciate the teaching. And then you come into your teacher and you offer some kind of presentation that embodies your appreciation of the teaching. So the Rinzai is focused more on insight and The Soto is focused more on just the quietness of sitting.
So the Chán study, that's one of those famous ones, the sound of one hand clapping?
What is the sound of one hand clapping is one, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they seem so opposite. How do you blend them?
Oh,
Or
they're
you
not
just teach
opposite,
separately?
they're complementary.
Okay. How do you put them together?
Well, in my own case, when I was doing koan study with Maizumi Roshi, I really focused on that because there's a curriculum of koan study. I think in our tradition there are 700. So when you're doing koan study with a teacher, you really focus on the koan and you come to the teacher as often as you can to present your appreciation, your understanding of the koan. But ultimately, you're going to be doing shikantaza anyway, because finally you'll be through with the koans. And then shikantaza is a good practice at the beginning, is a good practice in the middle, and it's a good practice at the end.
So you worked your way through all 700 koans?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Could you explain the sound of one hand clapping?
No.
Okay.
There's no good trying to explain a koan. In the context of doing koan study, you become, what can I say? You begin to appreciate what the teacher is trying to elicit from you. And so it's a very personal connection between you and another person, the student and the teacher. Very personal, very intimate.
So each student would have a different lesson from that one koan?
No, probably each student would have a similar lesson from the koan.
Okay.
But the students don't discuss the koans among themselves. You only relate to the teacher with the koan.
Interesting. Okay. You know, we've been talking about this, the meditation and everything. How do you feel about doing the demonstration right now?
Oh, sure. Be glad to.
Then let's go.
Okay.
And I'll just sit here and you'll just give some commentary about how the positioning is, the breathing is, whatever the people need to know.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to sit here on this cushion. But before I do, a lot of people have difficulty sitting cross-legged on a cushion. Not important. So I'll start with the chair. What is important, Zazen is a very physical practice. It's mental, but it's also very physical. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'll mention some of the key points. There's a really good book that describes Zen meditation in detail. I don't know if there's any way to present that to the people in the audience.
You can just give it to them right now.
I can tell you what it is. It's called Zen Meditation in Plain English, and it's by a man with the unlikely name of John Buxbazen.
Okay.
So, but Zen Meditation in Plain English will get it for you. Anyway, that goes into detail. But let me just say that it's important to sit upright, erect. It's a position of awakeness, and basically what we're trying to do is wake up, and to wake up to our true nature. It's a position of awakeness, and it's a position of dignity. It's also a position that allows you to sit for, let's say, a half hour at a time. When we do meditation retreats, we sit for hours every day. So you need a position that isn't going to, that you can hold, that you can sit. So it's important to sit upright and to sit still. Because we are trying to, I guess I could say, look into this moment, not to get more comfortable or to change so that we can feel differently, but what is this moment exactly? And to do that, you need to sit still. So upright and still.
So if they're sitting in a chair, you got your back upright but not rigid.
Not rigid, but no, your shoulders should be completely relaxed.
Okay.
But you don't want to be leaning back
backwards.
On the chair. You want to be because it's your own. It's your life, and your awakening. Be there for it.
Can you allow the back of the chair to support you, or should you be away from the back of the chair?
It's best to be away from the back of the chair. But let me say that all kinds of people have all kinds of physical difficulties. So you can do Zazen lying on your back in bed. It's not recommended because you'll probably fall asleep.
Fall asleep.
But what I'm saying is, what I'm offering is, I guess I could say, the ideal way to do it. But modify it, if you can't maintain a position like this, then use the back of the chair.
So
if you can't sit upright, lie down.
You have your hands on your knees, and
No, I have my,
Okay.
Hands on knees is fine. There is what we call a mudra, which is like that. It's right hand, left hand on top, thumbs touching, and you make a nice oval. And there's some good reasons for that, but it's not critical.
And feet flat on the floor?
Yeah, feet flat on the floor if you're using a chair.
Okay.
Now, I much prefer myself sitting on a cushion, so to the cushion, huh?
To the cushion.
I always like to bow to my cushion first.
While you're getting set, maybe we should address what you're wearing around your neck, what it means.
Oh, it's a ceremonial garment. You receive one of these from your teacher. The first one actually you make yourself, and after that they're given to you. You receive it from your teacher, and he's always written something on the back. And it's just an indicator of, well, this is my Inca Rakasu, so it indicates my Dharma transmission. But you, even as a beginning student, you can receive one through a certain ceremony. They're usually black, the first ones. Best to have your knees on the floor, something under your butt, because it's hard to sit upright otherwise. These black cushions are perfect. If you can't get your knees on the floor, get a little cushion to put under your knees so that you're not like that. Then upright. As I said, the mudra there are good reasons for it, but it's not critical. Use your hands on your knees if you prefer. Shoulders should be relaxed and your head tilted a little bit forward. Usually in Zen, we sit with our eyes about half open and unfocused. That helps because you don't get so sleepy that way. But you can sit with your eyes closed. That's not important. So I think I'm just going to talk through a process, okay?
Go right ahead.
And I'm going to assume that you folks out there are doing it with me, but you may not be. I'm going to talk as if you are. So having found a good seat, upright, comfortable, just pay attention to your breath. Don't try to change it. Just notice it. And you might spend up to a few minutes just noticing your breath. And it's a good idea to imagine your breath as though your breath is being drawn in and released from a point down here in your abdomen, about midway between your navel and your pubis and about midway between the front and the back. So right in the center of your abdomen. Don't try to make that happen, but just use that image of that's where the breath is being drawn from and released from. And you might spend some time just using that image. Don't try to change your breath. Don't try to make it something different. Maybe deep breaths or short breaths, probably some combination. Just let it happen. And then whatever arises in your mind, in your body, sensations, feelings, thoughts, whatever it is, surrender those feelings, thoughts to the breath. I say surrender because it's not a good idea to try to get rid of anything. We are allowing this moment to unfold. As you do this, you can be aware that breathing is not something you do in the sense that you have any choice. You don't. You're going to breathe. You may be able to hold your breath for a short time, but you're going to breathe. So think of your breathing not so much as something you do, as something in which you participate, because you can't breathe alone. At the very least, you need oxygen, and the oxygen comes in the air. So when you breathe, you are participating with the air. You and the air are breathing together. But you can't have air, you can't have oxygen without green plants. So when you are meditating, when you are breathing, you are participating with the air, the oxygen, green plants all over the earth, water, because you can't have green plants without water. You can't have green plants without soil. So you are participating. This process of breathing involves you, air, green plants, water, earth. I think you can see where I'm going with this. When you breathe, you are involved in a process that involves everything on earth. The whole earth is involved in your breathing. And that's what you surrender to. Another way to describe it would be you are surrendering to what is. When the Buddha had his great awakening, he had sat for 7 days and 7 nights. On the morning of the 8th day, he looked up at the morning star and he said, "Wonderful, wonderful. I and all beings and the great earth simultaneously attain the way. Simultaneously realize our true nature." And that's our, I guess you could say, our challenge and our effort is to realize our true nature, which is not separate from the entire earth. Of course, we could say the entire cosmos. So this is a very simple, not necessarily easy, but very simple form of zazen, Zen meditation. Pay attention to your breathing. And all that keeps you from realizing your true nature are all the ideas and feelings and opinions and beliefs you have about yourself and the rest of the world. Give them up, and your true nature is immediately apparent. I say this is a very simple process, and it is, but it's also very profound. It's really the insights that arise from this and the equanimity that arises from this is endless and keeps on changing. So maybe that's enough, huh?
If you think so. You're the teacher.
Well, Phil, maybe on behalf of the audience, you could ask some questions if you like.
Definitely will. You must be reading my mind. One of the things that first question. There is no specific breathing method, like in through the nose and out through the mouth.
No.
So,
well, if you can, unless your nose is plugged up, breathe through your nose. It's the most normal, natural. Your breath should be natural.
So however we're naturally used to breathing is what we're supposed to do.
What's that?
However we naturally breathe, just do it, not
Yeah,
the focus.
now the advice I gave in the beginning of imagine the breath coming from deep in your abdomen is helpful because many people are what you might call chest breathers.
Yeah.
They don't use their diaphragm to breathe. And the most efficient way to breathe is using your diaphragm. And the best way to do that is to imagine your breath coming and releasing from deep in your abdomen.
Do we watch it go in and out, or just...
You can. That's another way to meditate, is to watch the breath. I prefer to do what I described, which is surrender all of my ideas and thoughts and feelings to the breath.
So I just become one with the breathing.
That might happen. That might be what you experience.
Okay.
It's a practice. It's a procedure. So if you undertake that procedure, whatever you experience during that procedure is okay.
Surrendering our thoughts is not something that most people are used to doing.
No kidding.
Can you expand on that? I mean, how would one go about surrendering a thought?
Well, let me say first of all that what keeps us, maybe I'll use the word trapped, although I'm not entirely happy. What keeps us contained within a sense of self, I'm me, I'm not you, we're separate, is all our beliefs, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings about me, you, the world, right? If we can let go of those, we can experience ourselves as all of it, everything. It's a release, it's a refuge. We're released from the container, from the, maybe even the prison of self. So, but it doesn't work very well to try to get rid of the ideas and thoughts, to try to block them or stop them. Then you just get into a kind of a battle with yourself, which isn't productive. But if you can allow your thoughts, feelings, and so on to just surrender them. Okay, they come up, let them go. Give them over to the breath. Give them over to breathing.
The reason I'm asking the question is, you may remember we've talked about this on the air. I'm a recovering drug addict, 12-step recovery.
Great program, by the way. 12-step programs, fantastic.
They are, and when he says I'm going to do a show on them, but one of the things that really threw me when I first got into the 12-step meetings, they kept telling me to surrender. I didn't have a clue what that meant, and that's why I'm asking you to try to guide people, because I really don't think most people, surrender is we watch a movie, somebody loses, they wave a white flag.
Yeah, surrender has a very bad reputation in the
Yes.
West. No, you don't surrender. You want to conquer, right? Overcome. But yeah, the surrender that's spoken of in AA, I think, is really very similar to the surrender that I'm speaking of. It's letting go of, and letting go rather than trying to get rid of your ideas. They're not so important. You're not so important.
Let me...
And I'm sure I know that's part of AA, right?
Well, I'm not part of NA.
Well, whatever it is, NA or whatever it is.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question then, or let's use this example. I've heard many examples about in early meditation. One was the concept of boxes on like a conveyor belt. And you could watch each box, let it go by, but not stop it and open to see what's inside.
Oh, that's a nice image.
Would that tie into surrender?
Yeah, probably. If you're using that image in meditation, then I guess the boxes somehow symbolize your thoughts and beliefs and feelings and so on. And
Yeah, so the first box going down the conveyor belt may be my job that I got to go to. My second box is my relationship. Just watch them pass, but don't open them up and look inside to see.
And of course, that's very difficult to do.
Yes.
And when you're doing this procedure that I described, you'll find yourself, so you're paying attention to your breathing. Whenever it comes up, you're surrendering to your breathing. And then at some moment you realize, oh, I haven't been paying attention to my breathing at all. I've been thinking about my job, or my relationship, or the trip I'm going to take, or the mistake I made yesterday, or whatever it is. That's okay. Just surrender it then. Let it go.
Let go of it and just go back and focus in on.
Let go. Just surrender it to your breath. Let it go into your breathing.
Okay. Last question, then we'll go on to some other stuff.
Okay.
We're sitting, Zazen is always eyes kind of like half open, half shut kind of deal.
Yeah, the only real reason for that, I believe, is so your meditation, your Zazen, is not so sleepy, not so dreamy.
Does it help to focus in on, I mean, I've heard about doing Zazen with like looking at a candle burning, focusing on the flame.
I don't think it's helpful.
Okay.
That's a form of meditation which is not particularly advised in Zen, and that is where you're trying to attain a narrow focus. So you're looking at a candle and you're trying to keep your entire attention on the candle. In a way, it's the opposite of what I'm recommending.
So what you're recommending is basically kind of looking out but seeing nothing.
Looking, well, I'm not looking up, I'm more looking down.
I said looking out.
Looking out.
In fact,
wherever your head's pointing. You very quickly become, it becomes easy to unfocus your eyes. So I'm not seeing anything, but my eyes are open. I mean, there's light. If something moved in front of me, I'd see it.
Okay.
And as I said, it's a way to be less dreamy and less sleepy in the meditation.
Yeah, I agree. But people tell me they meditate laying down. It's like, really?
Well, I've had some people who had to because they were bedridden.
Yeah.
And
that takes a lot of discipline to cross over into the sleep zone.
It does. Put me on my back and I fall asleep in about 2 minutes.
Exactly. I second that. Okay, let's go on to Zen Buddhism.
Okay.
Talk about the history of it.
Okay.
How does it start? Where does it start?
Well, I guess you could say that, and we talked about this before the program, there are the myths of Buddhism and the historical facts of Buddhism, whether it's Zen or some other form. They're both valuable. They're both helpful and inspiring, but they're not the same. And in fact, I think that's the basic mistake that fundamentalists in any religion make. They try to turn the myths into history.
Are there fundamentalist Buddhists? I've never heard of them.
Well, I don't encounter them, but I bet there are.
Fundamentalism is like, to me, so opposite of every teaching, but if I had to pick one teaching, it would be the most opposite of.
Yeah, but you have to remember that the Buddhism we encounter here in the West is Buddhism taught by people who came over here who were very open-minded and interested in new experiences and teaching new students. The people that were in the most fundamental Buddhist sects, they didn't want to come over here and deal with a bunch of barbarians.
So let's drift just for a second for my own curiosity. I mean, one of the basics of Buddhist teaching is the middle way. How could you be a Buddhist and be a fundamentalist?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not a fundamentalist.
Okay.
And I just don't want to assume that there aren't. You could say the same thing if you're a Christian and Jesus taught love thy neighbor. How could you be for holy wars?
I agree.
You know, so I mean, the teaching, anybody's teaching, can be perverted into some pretty awful forms.
Okay. So
the myth is that this old Indian named Bodhidharma came to China. He walked to China from India, long trip. And when he got there, he met Emperor Wu. And Emperor Wu had heard that this holy man was coming from India, so he came out with his retinue, and he met Bodhidharma. We have to imagine Bodhidharma, this travel-weary, bedraggled, dirty, old Indian guy. And Emperor Wu introduced himself and said, here's what I've done. Buddhism was already in China, by the way. There was already Buddhism, but not Bodhidharma's brand. And Emperor Wu said, here's all I've done for Buddhism. I've founded hospitals, I've founded monasteries, I've supported monks and nuns and so on. How much merit have I achieved? And Bodhidharma said, none. Emperor Wu said, it wasn't what he expected. And Emperor Wu said, well, what's the holiest truth of Buddhism? And Bodhidharma said, vast emptiness. Well, what's the holiest truth of Buddhism? Emperor Wu said. And Bodhidharma said, no holiness, vast emptiness. So Emperor Wu is getting increasingly confused. And finally he says to Bodhidharma, who are you? And Bodhidharma says, I don't know. At which point, Bodhidharma decides the interview is over, and he goes off to sit in a cave for 9 years. And that's a little more to the story, but that's the essence of it. But that's a myth. There's no historical basis for that. But it's a wonderful myth. The name itself
translates into, I mean, it's more, it's not even a name, it's more of a title almost.
What's that?
Bodhidharma.
Yeah, but the names of all the patriarchs are all what are called dharma names. They're all names that somehow have to do with the teaching.
Okay.
So, but as I said, we don't have any assurance that Bodhidharma was an actual person. But let me say that I listened to a fascinating lecture by a colleague of mine, another Zen teacher in my lineage. And he was talking about the core question in the Indian mind. And he said the core question in the Indian mind has always been, how do you get off the wheel? The wheel of suffering, the wheel of life and death, birth and death. How do you get off the wheel? And that's what the Buddha taught, fundamentally. An end to suffering. Get off the wheel. Now, the core question in the Chinese mind is very different, according to my friend. He said the core question in the Chinese mind is, how do you govern? How do you govern the self? How do you govern the state? How do you govern the family? So the question that Chán Buddhists sat with was, yes, how do you get off the wheel? But beyond that, how do you live in the world in a way that is liberating not only for yourself but others?
Well, let's back this up for a second. What you're talking about in terms of the Chinese question, then really backtracks to Confucius. Which backtracks to the Tao.
To Lao Tzu, yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Right. Confucius and Lao Tzu are kind of complementary. Confucius was all about how do you govern. Lao Tzu was about how to become one with nature. And both of those came into Buddhism to form Chán Buddhism.
So did Chán Buddhism originate in China or India?
No, it originated in China.
So somewhere along the way, we took the traditional Buddhist practice and it got to China, and it kind of merged with the existing thoughts patterns.
Exactly.
And formed Chán Buddhism.
That's right. That's right. You know, I want to say that during this lecture, somebody asked Maurice, that's the fellow's name, what's the core question in the West? And he thought for a moment, and he said, the core question in the West, since the time of the Greeks, has always been, what is the self? What is the self? And I thought, well, of course, that's what Western philosophy, Western psychotherapy is all about. What is the self, and what is the best expression of the self? So I think that's why we're seeing now another, we could call another turning of the wheel, which is the Western concern with the best way to express the self as manifested in psychology and psychotherapy. And we're now seeing a merger of psychology, psychotherapy, and Buddhism in the West. And it's going to be quite different. It is already, and it's going to continue to be quite different from the Chán and Zen Buddhism of Eastern Asia.
Well, it'll have to be, because Buddhism answers that question with there is no self.
Not exactly. Not exactly. You know, one of the things that is true about Mahayana Buddhism is it's never yes or no. It's always both yes and no. So is there a self? Well, yes, of course. If you tell me there's no self, I'm going to say, you're a fool. Look at you sitting there. Look at me. We're selves. But on the other hand, that's an illusion.
And that's exactly what I'm getting to, is that in whatever shape or form we see the universe, whether we see it as an energy form, as a deity, in our finite human minds, we cannot balance the concept, the paradox basically, of non-duality with having duality.
But that's exactly what we have to embrace.
Exactly.
Paradox.
And that's what Buddhism takes us to, where the Western thinking is more about, I'm just me. Well, I've got X amount of years to play and do and make and be, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, but there are some Western mystics that have had this experiences very close to Buddhism. Who was I reading? I can't remember. One of the famous Western mystics of the Middle Ages. His name escapes me right now. And it sounded so much like Buddhism.
Well, I think when you get down to the core of everybody's teachings, they all really coming to that same place of
maybe so,
the duality and the non-duality. You know, I think that they're guiding us on a path. I mean, for me, I see Jesus' resurrection as another demonstration of Buddha's nirvana, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's interesting the different ways the stories unfold. I mean, the Buddha's death was really very mundane and very undramatic, whereas Jesus' death was wow.
Yeah.
You know. So the stories are different, but in some way the teachings, if you get down to the deepest level.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. But I think that most, there are mystics in the Western tradition, and there are teachers in the Western tradition who get down to that basic core level and teach it and understand it. But for the most part, I don't think the average individual gets that message.
Yeah, but the average individual your average Buddhist in Asia doesn't get it either.
Okay.
I mean, you take people who identify themselves in Japan as Zen Buddhists, and I don't mean monks. I mean, Soto Zen in Japan is like, I don't know, Methodism in America. There's millions of them. But they don't meditate. They don't do zazen. They have a belief and a faith, and they support the monks, but they don't try to penetrate into the depth. I think it's only a few people in any culture that ever want to do that.
Interesting. Why? Solve all the problems of the world in this one show.
Why don't people do it?
Yeah.
Maybe because it requires a lot of effort, and it doesn't fit very well into what the culture advertises as its values.
Are we basically getting back to that concept of surrender?
Yes.
I have to surrender self in order to get onto that path and advance on it.
Yeah. Now, you don't get rid of the self. You need a self. You need a well-developed, functional self to be in the world, to be in relationship, to work, to play. You need a self. But what we would say in Zen is, that's not your true nature. That's not who you are at the deepest level. And if you don't realize who you are at the deepest level, then you're always going to be confined. The first noble truth of Buddhism is life is characterized by dukkha, suffering or dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
You know? We're never really satisfied, or not for long. There's always something we want that we don't have, or something we have that we don't want. And that's the way we live our life. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's a way to live one's life beyond or in spite of that truth.
Which would require surrender and sacrifice in the minds of the beginning practitioner.
Yeah, especially surrender. I think surrender is key. You have to surrender your ideas about who you are, your beliefs about who you are. I think if you're going to go very deeply into the practice, you have to surrender to a teacher. In other words, you have to say, you know, I'll give up my ideas about who I am and how I should be living my life in order to go according to what you recommend. Now, I think it's very important to pick a teacher that is trustworthy, because there are a lot of charlatans.
How do you recognize a trustworthy teacher?
I wish I could tell you how, Phil. I don't know. I don't know how. I mean, there are some basic ways, you know, that you learn to identify people that are untrustworthy.
So if the first thing they do is ask you to turn over all their assets, you may not want to stay long.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, the horror stories abound, right?
Yeah.
About sexual exploitation, people being led to commit suicide. I mean, there are horror stories about people who surrendered to a teacher. So I think you do need to surrender, but you need to surrender wisely, carefully.
Little by little. Yeah, I agree.
Little by little, but at some point altogether.
Altogether, but yeah, it's like going into the ocean.
Test the water.
Yeah, put your ankle in, put your calf in, put your thigh in. I got you. We're going to be running down on time.
Okay.
So you have an announcement you want to make. I'm going to make a couple announcements. So we'll come back for some final thoughts.
Well, I think somebody already showed the information about where I teach.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we're doing a retreat this weekend. It begins Thursday night. If you're interested in participating in some or all of that, you can email me. I think my email address.
Can they, because this show is going to start airing from 8 to 9 Thursday night.
Oh, well, if they wanted to
come in the middle of this?
For part of it, they could
Okay.
email me and arrange for that. Mm-hmm.
Because people will be seeing this show
And
Thursday night, Friday afternoon, and Saturday morning. So at any point they can come and just knock on the door, so to speak.
No, they should contact
you first.
so I can tell them when to come. But
Okay.
maybe this weekend it would be a little difficult. But our entire schedule for the rest of this year and all of next year is on the website. So all of our weekly schedule and our retreat schedule, everything is there on the website.
Okay, I got a couple announcements, and we'll come back with some parting thoughts. First thing I want to do is let you all know that, if you don't already figured it out, public access means this station is for you, the public. So my contact information has been flashing, will continue to flash, and runs at the end of the show. I'd love to hear from you. Comments about shows we've done, this show, another show, shows you'd like to see me do, anything. Just don't be nasty. I might not respond to nastiness. Love to hear from you. Along those lines, I've been putting it out there. I'm going to continue to put it out there. I would love to do a show about Edgar Cayce. I need somebody to do the show with. I don't want to sit here for an hour and talk all by myself. I could do that, but don't want to. So if you have any particular affinity for Edgar Cayce, call me. Let's sit and talk for a while and see if we can put together a show. And, it's real simple. Is this difficult for you, sir?
Oh, it's terrible.
See? You can do it. If Sydney can do it, you can do it.
You're so hard to talk to.
Thank you. So let me hear from you on that. Next week, we're doing this week and next week is kind of an interest. I've put it together intentionally. We're going to follow the migration of Buddhism out of India. So the first step was the migration into China, Japan, Korea, Zen Buddhism, as we call it. Next week, we're going to look at Tibetan Buddhism and how that migrated, which I believe that my misunderstanding may be is that it migrated actually from China to Tibet. It didn't migrate from India to Tibet, but that's for next week's show. Last but not least in my announcements, I am a spiritual counselor. I also have a state license. I'm a state licensed alcohol drug abuse counselor. I believe that without a spiritual component, we do not heal. And so I take a fairly different approach to the whole process, and I basically do my work under my ministry as opposed to my state license. But my work is on a donation basis. I'm happy to work with you. God takes care of me. It's been that way for 7 years now, and I don't mess with things when they don't need to be. If it ain't broken, you don't fix it, right? So if you think that, maybe a spiritual component in your healing process might work, contact me. Just, doesn't cost anything. You don't have to make a donation. It's not mandatory. We could talk about it. So that's the end of our announcements. What would you like to touch on? We've got about 5 minutes and change left.
I really encourage you to look at our website. It's a very nice website, and it's got, as I said, all of our schedule through 2011. It's got quite a few Dharma talks that I've given at the Zendo that you can listen to. A lot of my photographs.
Great photographs. This man goes hiking and takes some great pictures of vistas of mountains. And
thank you.
Check them out.
Thank you.
But let's back up. For the people who are not familiar, what is a Dharma talk?
Oh, it's just a talk given in the context of every Sunday morning we have a program. We sit for we have a short service, sit for 2 periods, and then there's a Dharma talk. It's a talk about Buddhism, about Zen, something to do with the Buddha Dharma. Okay. So a number of those, the ones that I think are worth keeping, are on the website. And also, you mentioned your role as a counselor. I am also still work as a psychotherapist at my advanced stage. I have a practice here in Santa Fe, so that's another way that I keep busy.
I want to ask you a question. We're talking about facts versus myths. Mm-hmm. My best understanding is that the initial establishment of Chán Buddhism was at the Shaolin Monastery, and that's where Kung Fu originated. Is that an accurate?
I don't think so. Shaolin is where, it's the name of a mountain, and it's where Bodhidharma went after he was disgusted with Emperor Wu, and where he sat for 9 years before he finally took on a disciple. And presumably that's also where, I don't know which of the martial arts, but one of them, began, but I don't know what the connection is, and it's all in the realm of myth, and you probably have to ask some kung fu expert on that one.
Well, that was the martial art was kung fu. It started out as a spiritual exercise. I mean, again, I don't know how true the story is.
No,
but,
I don't either.
You know, but it was meant to be. What I saw that as, and just drifting away here, but it's like it was the equivalent of basically, not the equivalent, but the same intention as yoga. How do I center my energy in my body? And
could be.
Let it
I
flow.
know nothing about it.
Yeah. Okay, because that was just.
But I did want to say that one of the things that I've always appreciated about Buddhism is it doesn't offend one's reason. There's nothing unreasonable about Buddhism, and it's perfectly compatible with Western science. In fact, the farther Western science goes in its development, the more it sounds like Buddhism.
I agree.
So this conflict between Christianity, the Abrahamic religions, and science that has existed forever just doesn't exist in Buddhism. And in fact, the Dalai Lama was known to say, if science comes up with something that contradicts the Buddhist teachings, we'll have to revise the Buddhist teachings.
That's interesting. It's probably a whole other show. I've done a show similar to this on it, but because of that conflict with the Abrahamic tradition, science almost had to become its own religion.
Oh, yeah.
And that started another set of conflicts.
But there are now a lot of scientists that are very,
Yes.
the Dalai Lama has these conferences where he brings scientists together with
Spiritual people.
his monks.
Yeah.
And they have a wonderful time and find a lot of commonality.
There's a great book out there, I forget, Dalai Lama in the Universe or something like that.
Yeah, there are several
Yeah.
books about those meetings.
And I find that, for me, the exact same thing, and that's one of the problems, and I got to talk quickly here, is with the evolution and what we are learning about how the brain functions, most of traditional talk therapy is being made obsolete by the new sciences.
No, I don't agree with that.
But that's another show.
I think talk therapy is being confirmed by the science that's being developed. But we could have a discussion about that sometime.
Yes, definitely. So it's time for me to say goodbye. Sydney, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
A real
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Sit with it. Practice your meditation. Take some of the instruction.
Yeah, sit 5 minutes a day. The benefits of meditation, whether you're a Buddhist or anything else, the benefits of meditation are absolutely confirmed by science.
Yes.
They're profound and deep and wonderful. Sit 5 minutes a day. Maybe you'll like it and you'll sit for 10 minutes a day.
Exactly. It cannot hurt. So until next week, know that you are one with the force, the spirit, the universe, whatever it is that you believe in. Know that you are one with it. Reach inside, let it come out. It's not your job to let it in, it's your job to let it out. Demonstrate it in the world. Demonstrate it with the people you live with, the people you love, the people you work with. So until next week, walk in love and light, and may you all be blessed. Thank you. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.